Good morning, YouTube neighbors. Just wanted to share today's topic, which was by request. There's no such thing as a law-abiding citizen. This was suggested by a friend of mine named Matt, and I'm not sure if I've told him the story, but I don't know if I'll have a chance to splice it in. But in a lot of my previous videos, the very first street that I turn onto in the mornings, you might notice it's kind of strange the way that it's laid out, the way that it's striped. And it used to be a 4-lane road, 2 lanes heading south and 2 lanes heading north. And it is a U.S. route, so that means that there's federal funding behind it, and though it's actually maintained by the city. And I don't know how much federal involvement there is in a U.S. route. That's something that I would really need to look into more, and I was a little surprised at how little there was. The person behind me was honking at me.
Manual recording will now start.
They seem to want me to run red lights. Oh, it's a young lady who's making crazy faces and screaming at me. She's going to really love traffic. I wonder if she'll drive by everyone on the berm. So yeah, anyway, it started out as a 4-lane road, 2 lanes northbound and 2 lanes southbound. Well, she's gonna go past everyone there. Yep, she's passing another vehicle. There's someone else following her lead. Hotel Golf Hotel 9947. They're just cutting. So that woman got like maybe 300 feet on everyone, and now she's in the center lane. So I'm curious. It's kind of gridlocked this morning. Anyway, the road is 2 lanes north and 2 lanes south, and that handled capacity pretty well a lot of times, because anytime someone was like, there was a slow bicyclist or a bus in the right lane, like the buses would stop because it's a fairly busy bus route. Also, a lot of people would ride their bikes in the neighborhood, so they'd be in the right lane and stuff like that. It was, I don't know, I'd say it was a challenging environment to drive in, because there were also cars stopping to turn left into a lot of residential streets. So between the buses and the cyclists and the cars stopping without much warning to turn left and obviously wait until opposing traffic cleared, which is a variable amount, I'd say there were a lot of variables there. And from a traffic engineering standpoint, I'm not an expert in traffic engineering, but I understand that there are, when you have a lot of variables like that, it can tend to lead to high accident rates. So a lot of the freeways in the area have been reconfigured so that they have fewer points of conflict. So they've been replacing old-fashioned cloverleaf type arrangements with lots of points of conflict. They've been replacing those with flyover ramps and all these elaborate designs that are designed to minimize the number of times that a person has to merge. And so it's hopefully fewer opportunities for an accident. And I think a driver can experience that reduced conflict by a more pleasant, almost mindless experience through, instead of having to worry about people merging into your lane or merging into other lanes 5 or 6 times through an interchange. You might have to think about it like once or twice, and then everything else is kind of configured as like single lane roads, so you don't even have people passing you in a lot of cases. Everyone just kind of tucks in and gets through the intersection and then moves on back to multi-lane freeway like this, where there's a little bit of strategy involved in being familiar with the roadway and figuring out. I'm on an interstate right now, and there are 3 lanes southbound and 3 lanes northbound, and they're all full of cars. I mean, you can't. I would say on average we're all going to get downtown at about the same time, which makes drivers like the one I encountered first thing this morning all the more frustrating, because she was honking at me for stopping at a red light. I mean, that's the law, lady. And then she got irritated when I stopped at a second red light at a metered ramp, and then she ran the red light and came through right behind me, tailgated, so it's pretty ridiculous, conduct. So how this ties into being a law-abiding citizen is that when the configuration of the lanes changed, I've started reading up on the concept of a they call it a road diet. And so what they did is they went through and they took it from 4 lanes and they took it to 3, with the 4th lane was split into a bike lane on each side. So they had a bike lane, and then they had 1 lane for travel, and then they have 1 lane that's for miscellaneous left turns only. And that was part of the confusing part, because it wasn't really clear to me that the way the law was written. I wanted to kind of refresh myself on it, because a lot of people were asking questions in the neighborhood chats about, well, like, what do we do if a COTA bus stops? Because that's the transit agency here. Because if the bus stops, the bike lanes are 5 feet wide and the buses are like 10 feet wide or so. And so the bus is going to be blocking half of the travel lane. So theoretically, if 2 buses stopped directly across from each other, like maybe one was disabled or something, then you could end up with a situation where anyone driving around the bus would come into conflict with anyone else trying to use the left turn lane. So because the left turn lane is for both directions of travel. So if someone were legitimately trying to use the left turn lane, then someone passing the bus would be encroaching on their space. And that was something I thought was a little odd, because I started reading about left turn lanes and center multi-direction lanes and stuff, and the law at the state level, it seemed to indicate that it was okay to use for passing, which had not been my understanding. And when I had seen a driver at one point passing other drivers in that lane, I thought it was a little obnoxious at the time, and then I saw a sheriff deputy go through the lane with his lights on and pull over the car, apparently for doing so. So I'd had some kind of feedback that that was inappropriate. So anyway, I started digging into exactly what the law was, and everything I found seemed to indicate that it was okay. But then when I talked to people who should know, like traffic engineers, because I actually work near an organization called the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, and they they're a group of traffic engineers and planners. And in fact, there's it's not exactly a road diet, but it's a 3-lane road with a center turn lane, and that's right in front of their offices. And so I was like literally pointing at it, talking to one of the traffic engineers there, and like, okay, so how does this work? Like, what is the law on this? And that was another thing that really frustrated me as I asked people who were supposed to be authorities on the subject matter. None of them were citing actual law or statute or code or design guidelines or anything like that to answer the question. They were all just going on personal understanding and hunches, and they were being fairly honest with that. Well, sometimes honest with it. Like, sometimes they would say authoritatively what the law was, and then I would ask them like where I could find that, and they didn't know, and they admitted later, like after I pressed them, that it wasn't, like, even they weren't really sure. And this happened, I ended up calling, so I thought, like, who can I talk to if the traffic engineers don't know what the law is, even though that they're the ones who, like, they have to know some element of the law, because the law dictates how they stripe the roads, okay? So there are regulations that are backed by force of law that dictate how the law should be striped. And so, you know, but the reality is that most of them, they're not really going based on the law. They're just going based on what an attorney in their office told them to do. And it's the job of the attorney to periodically follow up and see if the law has changed. Mostly, I think, to like stay abreast of summaries from other lawyers. And so what happens is these top level lawyers, they go and they inform the lawyers at these agencies, or they subscribe to a service that alerts them to changes, or they go to like forums or whatever, meetings where they talk about upcoming changes to the law, and then they make sure that they get the changes incorporated in their guidelines and stuff like that. But there's very little direct viewing of the law, and when there's an exception to that is when there's a problem, when there's a conflict. So if two agencies disagree on where a stripe should be or whatever, then that's when they're going to go and have the attorneys go and hash it out and figure out what the law probably is and what they need to do. And there's a lot of stuff that figures into it, like what is most likely to be the outcome, considering various court precedents and stuff like that. And also, what does the agency want to do? What are its reasons for wanting the lines one way versus another? Because obviously, if they don't care, then they'll just do it however they want. But if there is statute, then they start worrying about liability and that kind of thing. So yeah, it was clear that like no one really knew. And so ultimately, I decided, since I called the police and they didn't really know, they just said, well, I would do this. And also, what everyone said they would do, I think they were lying. Because a lot of them said that if a COTA bus stopped blocking the bike lane, then they would just sit patiently behind it and let a long line of cars build up behind them. And that wasn't my experience with... that hadn't been my experience with these people. During the course of my asking, they actually ended up restriping the roadway, so I was able to actually observe behavior, and I was able to see what happens when there's a COTA bus stopped in the bike lane and people indeed drive around it. And I saw a whole bunch of other conduct that was conflicting with the law. And so the practice is that it's kind of Wild West, that people just kind of do whatever they feel like doing. Sometimes they go around buses. I tried just stopping and waiting, and I'd say 2 or 3 cars out of a long line of cars that formed while I was waiting for the bus to unload, like 2 or 3 cars up near the front, like just past they weren't right behind me, but they like got out and went past everyone in the left turn lane, which was a little brazen and aggressive, if you ask me. So yeah, I was a little shocked at that. So what I did is like, well, who do I call next? Well, I decided to call the people who are ultimately, they inform the attorneys for the city, for the police. They inform those the police as to like what the law is, that, you know, from an enforcement standpoint. So my thinking was, if I find out who enforces the law, then I can find out details on how to obey it, because I had examples of where the city code and the state law conflicted, and then I'd of course been told conflicting things by police officers and by traffic engineers. So no one seemed to have a straight story on this stuff, and I just wanted to find out where there was common ground and get it ironed out. So I ended up calling the prosecutor's office, and that ran into a bunch of issues of jurisdiction, because I started, you know, I wasn't exactly sure what level of government the you know, the center turn lane thing came from. I mean, it's a state law, but I didn't think it was going to be enforced by, like, it could be enforced by the highway patrol, but probably not within an urban area. I wonder if this is a truck that has hit an, it looks like this truck hit an overpass here.
Manual recording will now start.
Yeah, that truck is screwed up. It didn't follow the 12'7" signs, and it got stuck under the bridge. So yeah, I called the prosecutors. It was like musical chairs. Eventually, a guy called from the city prosecutor's office, which is where the rubber hits the road if the city of Columbus is going to write me a ticket for that. And I talked with the guy, and I explained my frustration, and he agreed with me that it could be confusing, because he agreed that the law was, well, he didn't say that, but he seemed to understand why I was confused, because I was reading to him things that said different things from official sources. And when I did that, when I did that, he kind of got a little testy, because I was kind of pressing him. I said, well, you know, I don't really accept that you don't know, because it's your job to go to court and argue this kind of thing all the time, and presumably you do you do prosecute tickets for this kind of stuff. And he's like, well, most people just plead guilty and pay the fine and stuff. And well, yeah, I get that, but you still should have some kind of legal basis for the laws you're enforcing. So anyway, yeah, it's a really it's a frustrating situation. And he said something really interesting to me that led me to believe that there's, you know, if someone like me is going through all this effort to try to obey a rather trivial traffic law that in all reality you could violate right in front of a cop, and as long as it's convenient for the cop, he's not going to write a ticket, but he's probably going to write you a ticket if you do exactly the same thing and the cop already wants to stop you, or it causes an inconvenience for the cop. So for example, if you go and pull, you know, if you pass a transit bus or something and you end up going head on toward a cruiser, and cause the officer to fear that they're going to get in an accident, then they might flip around and give you a ticket. And a person would go, well, I didn't know, you know, I see people do this all the time, and the officer would be, well, you know, you should read the law, or the judge will tell you that. But yeah, so this kind of thing happens. And anyway, the prosecutor's office, they said, well, I'm going to be honest here, is that it's our job, if a police officer writes you a citation, it's our job to cite you. And it's their job to cite you, and it's our job to take that through the court system and win. So if I tell you how to obey the law specifically, and you do exactly as I tell you, then if a police officer ever gives you, keep in mind, this obscure ticket that many of you may never have even had and may not know someone that had, but even in this obscure example, they didn't want to tell me how to obey the law, because if I did somehow end up getting a ticket for conducting myself in the most legal way possible, based on my research and asking the enforcers of the law, that it's still their job to win in court. And since it would jeopardize their ability to win in court by having me following their instructions, they were just not going to tell me how to obey the law. And so ultimately they told me that the way that you know what the law is you do whatever the heck you want, whatever you think is reasonable, based on who knows what. Probably you're reading the statute and also observing what other people do, but other people break the law all the time, pretty obviously, like red light lady this morning. So, or she was mad at me for not doing it. Or the truck that we just saw that got wedged under a bridge because they violated the law and drove under a bridge when there was insufficient clearance. So, yeah, it's a situation where the government's position is ridiculous. It's impossible to obey the law, because it's impossible to know the law based on their assertion until you actually go through the entire legal process and find out what a judge's ruling is. Their claim was you can't even know the law when you're in the courtroom with the judge. Well, if you can't know the law, then how do you ever defend yourself? So this is another example of how the state is completely illegitimate. It would be possible to have legitimate laws, and it would be possible for the state to say, if you do exactly this, you will not get in trouble, or if you do get in trouble, then it will be dismissed. And many times the courts do dismiss things. You know, I heard of a case recently where there was a guy who had an OVI accusation from the police. He was charged with operating a vehicle intoxicated, and he was also charged with resisting arrest because he thought it was ridiculous and was talking back to the officer. And you know, I don't know the extent of that, but ultimately it went through the court system in about 6 months, and the judge berated the officer and the prosecutor from the county and said, this should have never been in my courtroom, you're wasting my time, all this kind of stuff. So I'm not saying that the court system doesn't have some kind of safety valve, but it has to, because otherwise people would be flipping out, because there'd be all these unjust situations. So anyway, I would encourage you, I mean, I know I have viewers from different corners of the world, and I'd just be curious if you get an opportunity to go and try and get to know your local officials in your legal apparatus, and try to get them to tell you exactly how to obey some law. Like, how can I cross the street and never get a ticket for jaywalking no matter what? Like, what do I have to do? Is that a rather simple process, or is this something that I have to be an attorney to understand? Which, in the city of Columbus, I would side with the attorney thing, because I've read in the statute that you actually have to, while in a crosswalk, you have to be walking to the right side of it. Even if you have a green crosswalk light and you're walking on the left side of it, it's still jaywalking based on how the statute is written, because it's ridiculous. They have, like, it doesn't really explain what to do. It just says, here are the things you can't do, and there's a very long list, and I see people violating items on the list all the time. Another thing is, once the don't walk sign starts flashing, people start entering the intersection. That's another thing it says explicitly is jaywalking under the city statute. So, I mean, if people can't obey simple laws, how on earth are they going to obey complicated ones? And if the government is going to be no help in that, then I just think it's kind of hopeless. And I think people need to think about that. And they need to research it a little bit for themselves. Like I said, try and get the state to show you the actual statute and explain exactly how to follow it, and see what happens. See if they tell you what they told me, which is, we're not going to tell you because we might want to lord it over you in the future. So anyway, that's it for me, and I'm going to talk to you tomorrow. Bye.